Well, with air rescue operations now coming to an end in Uttarakhand, it's time to reflect on the largest and one of the most successful peacetime air evacuation efforts. When the chips were down, when tens of thousands of people were stranded, when hope was fading fast, pilots of the Air Force, Army and some private airlines rose to the challenge, flying in extremely difficult conditions to rescue thousands. This is the story of how thousands of lives were saved by pilots, men and women, who rose to the challenge in some cases at the cost of their own lives. Just a few weeks back, this was a pasture for cows and goats belonging to villagers. No one would ever have imagined that within a day of the Kedarnath tragedy on the 17th of June, this remote air landing ground in a place called Gochar would become the staging area of a war. A war not to kill the enemy, but to save lives. The warriors were our men and women in uniform, determined, tireless and remarkably skillful in getting to the disaster area, getting down to helpless pilgrims and getting them out day in and day out. As the operations picked up pace, there were helicopters simultaneously taking off and landing here in Gochar every few minutes. The pace of operations had to be seen to be believed. As air rescue operations wind down in the Kedarnath area, this operation goes down as one of the biggest peacetime air rescue operations in history. From the 18th of June, the Indian Air Force had flown 2,200 sorties, evacuated 19,000 people and flown in more than 336,000 kilograms of equipment and supplies. The Indian Army, with its considerably smaller fleet of choppers, flew 774 sorties, evacuating 3,500 people. Civilian pilots on choppers which ferry pilgrims in these areas played a yeoman's role as well, saving countless lives. But these are just numbers. What made this operation incredibly difficult was the terrain. This is the Kedar Valley area. It's narrow with sharp ravines on either side. The weather has been fickle for days here. One moment there's sunshine, the next it's packed with clouds. Another helicopter of the Indian Air Force manages to try and get food supplies across to people who need it the most. But the bad news on this sortie is that the weather is packed and we have to return to the forward air landing strip from where we've been operating. This is the big concern, the weather. If the weather packs up, then helicopters don't get to fly and the people on the ground who need these supplies don't get what they need. Add to that sharp winds and tiny helipads, some constructed in hours by Army para-commandos blasting holes in the rock face. Flying here has always been and will always be some of the most challenging in the world.
Hills is got a very specific and peculiar type of climate. You have, for a normal inexperienced pilot, he might see the hills covered with clouds and may not even venture out to carry out evacuation. But over a period of time, having flown about 25 years in the army and then now in the commercial flying, we know how it works. And as long as they're on the hilltops, we manage going through the valley and cover up. But then also that has got its own points. Like sometimes they start traveling depending on how the winds are blowing.
For these pilots of the Air Force, saving lives became a family affair. Squadron leader S.K. Pradhan and Squadron leader Khushbu Gupta were married 4 years back. Squadron leader Vikram Tyagaraman and Flight Lieutenant Tanya Srinivas got married just last year. Here in Gochar, the only time they met their spouses was late in the evening. Through the day, they would be flying into danger, knowing that their loved ones were doing the same.
We actually kind of train ourselves not to think about each other while working.
Once we're in uniform, we're completely different people. Yes, of course. He tells me what happens during the day. I mean, what has happened during the day. What are the different experiences.
Maybe once I get out, I'll talk to her and think about her that she's taken off and where had she reached or that.
But these air operations came at a huge cost. When you push the limit like our forces did, accidents happen, sometimes despite the skill of the pilots. This civilian helicopter crash landed. The pilot was lucky to make it out alive. But on the 25th of June, tragedy struck the Indian Air Force. A recently inducted Mi-17 V5 chopper on a rescue mission from Gorchar to Guptkashi and Kedarnath crashed north of Gaurikund. All 20 people on board, including 5 Air Force officers, 9 NDRF personnel and 6 Indo-Tibetan Border Police personnel were killed. Undeterred by this tragic loss, the Air Chief's message to his officers was direct. Keep the rotors churning, the job is not complete.
We owe it to the lives of these people that we've lost, that we must sustain the mission and complete successfully.
By the time the operations gained their full momentum, the Indian Air Force had thrown in some of their most precious assets. The world's largest helicopter, the Mi-26, which flew in fuel Bowsers, and recently acquired C-130J transports, which brought in mobile hospitals. In all, there were upwards of 60 civilian and military aircraft deployed on the Uttarakhand front, the bulk of them helicopters. As the airborne rescue operations come to an end over Kedarnath and the full scale of the tragedy slowly becomes clear, it's time to perhaps reflect not only on the colossal loss of lives, but on the role of our brave men and women who willingly put their lives on the line to save the lives of others. When hope faded fast in the hills around Kedarnath, the sound of churning helicopter rotors signaled that all had not been lost. With a team of NDTV reporters and camera people, Vishnu Shom for NDTV.